I am Joshua Kemble, and I have been a professional artist for over 15 years, doing stuff from illustration to graphic design to now art directing, and I've been at the art director thing for about 6 going on 7 years, and when I'm not doing that, I'm working on my own cartoons and comics. Comics like the recently released 2 stories. Book 1, which is a graphic novel about faith and mental illness. It's a memoir that is hand-lettered, hand-inked, hand-drawn, and handed to you in print right now. So you can get that on Amazon.com and just search for 2 stories, Joshua Kemble. It's out from Marcosia Press, and I'm pretty excited about that being released finally because it was quite a few years of work. So that's who I am, and this is my Vloggins. So on yesterday's vlog, I was concerned because I was feeling like massive inability to work because of having pretty bad allergies to the point where I could barely like focus or see. And I was worried I'd get hit really bad with allergies that night to the point where I wouldn't be able to work. I got home. I actually did feel allergies again, so I took a very quick nap. Was able to wake up, read books to Ben, and then actually power through my workout. And then also on top of getting my workout done, I did manage to get a panel done for the next pitch project page that I'm working on for my literary agent for a collaborative project that we're going to be pitching around. So that gets me one step closer to finish with the pitch project, and that'll basically kind of catch me up. But I was excited to have that done. The one thing I wasn't able to do yesterday that I really wanted to was the live stream, but it's mainly because we have some family staying with us till the end of the week, and it just I didn't want to interrupt. Like, they were watching a film, and I didn't want to have them have to be interrupted for that when I'm already live streaming tonight, when Scott Circlin and I do Artcasters, and we have my friend Nathan Olson on. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. Let me see what else. So today is a pretty good day. I'm excited. I'm heading to work and feeling pretty optimistic because I was able to actually get back to the workflow, and I'm hoping to kind of get a lot accomplished tonight. So tonight's Artcasters, and so that should be pretty fun. But I also, hope to get some work done. I usually work on stuff during Artcasters, and so I think that'll be a good opportunity to get further on my pitch project. But make sure you guys tune in on my YouTube channel and watch Artcasters tonight to kind of see me interview my friend Nathan Olson, who's a really good illustrator, was an old friend of mine from grad school, and we actually taught together at Laguna College of Art and Design. He helped me a lot my first 2 semesters teaching there, kind of navigating some of the curriculum and setting up school assignments and stuff like that. It was just super enlightening and helpful. Yeah. So, that being said, now I'm on my way to work. I'm hoping it's a positive day at work. I'm sure it will be. And I'm just, basically gonna talk about some stuff I've been thinking about. So, I don't follow mainstream comics that much, but I had a friend who was kind of on Facebook who leans the opposite side of me politically, who is freaking out because apparently Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote an episode of an issue of Captain America in which he makes Red Skull pretty much like present like a bunch of stuff that's a very blatant reference to Jordan Peterson, and is just basically like calling Jordan Peterson a Nazi, and it's actually pretty funny. I read the I read the sections that are like in question, and honestly, they don't seem off. Like, they just don't seem like offhanded, weird comments or anything like that. But what I find funny is the friend who was posting about this stuff is like somebody who quite frequently like tirades against cancel culture, and or what he calls cancel culture, because of this perceived idea that like the left is constantly going around canceling people. And I just thought it was a little ironic, because it's like, meanwhile, he's trying to get Ta-Nehisi Coates canceled, and I just thought, I don't know, there's something really interesting about that. So he was talking about how Ta-Nehisi Coates shouldn't be writing any properties that he loves and that he's involved in reading, because the guy's like a comic nerd. I just thought, like, what a weird thing to read that like a week after I was reading posts by the same friend about tirading about cancel culture and how dare people cancel other people for saying things. So I just thought that was kind of weird. To me, like, one of the things I'd like to see personally, and I'm not going to get like super political on a lot of these vlogs, but I will probably talk politics just like I do on my live streams or whatever. I'm pretty openly left-leaning politically, and like I'm also equally like okay and tolerant to anyone who has like a differing viewpoint, as long as it's not like personally harming me or my family. But I thought it was funny because, like, this guy, like I said, literally a week ago was tirading about how horrible cancel culture is and how the left just wants to cancel art. And literally a week later, he's talking about wanting to cancel Ta-Nehisi Coates, one of the best writers in comics, and just a really solid, amazing writer in general, for making a joke about Jordan Peterson in his book. So anyhow, I don't know. I thought it was funny. I thought it was interesting. I do find like I said, maybe there's more to it that I haven't checked out. But to me, like, one thing that I really value in people is consistency. So to me, it's like, if you want to be consistently against cancel culture, and I'm putting that in quotes because I'm not sure if the form of cancel culture everybody seems concerned about is really a concern. But anyhow, my point is, if you're going to tirade against it and be all about free speech and people of whatever political persuasion being able to work, then you have to be consistent with it and let people of all political persuasions create work. And like calling for people to be taken off of books or writing certain properties, because they talk about something you don't like, is exactly the kind of cancel culture that I think if you're against, you need to be against, like, equally, on all footing. And this is one of the things that irritates me. And I'm not saying it's you guys, like, especially if somebody following me is right-leaning or whatever politically. I can't say this is you, but I have noticed this pervasive tendency to, for like people to point point their finger at other people's sin or other people's wrongs, like, as long as they're on the other side of the fence and the other team, and then just kind of ignore the flaws in your own team. And to me, that just seems like such a baffling thing, where it's like, if you're adamantly against cancel culture, be adamantly against it, whether it's somebody on the left being canceled or somebody on the right. Don't just like pick and choose which cancellation you're going to be upset about, because the second you do that, then you have a double standard, and it gets back to that whole log and speck and eye kind of thing, right? Where it's like, I definitely see that a lot, where it's like I'm seeing, like this friend in particular that I'm talking about, it's like the guy is really fond of taking specks out of other people's eyes as long as those people are on the left. But when it comes to like just seeing their own kind of absurd adherence and committing of the same things that they're tirading against. It's just like they have an inability to see when they're doing that. And I think it's partially that whole, like, it's easy to take specks out of somebody's eye when you have a log in your own. And so, anyhow, that being said, that's something that's on my mind. Other than that, I really hope I have a good work day. I hope I have some productive art time tonight. And I appreciate you guys who are watching this. So I'll check in with you on my way home from work. Let me know your thoughts on that. Like, do you feel like, well, actually, I want to get into that a little bit more, but it's like for instance, cancel culture has been around for a long time before it was called cancel culture, and most of my memory in my lifetime was of like that happening from people who were right-leaning, where it's like, like the whole satanic panic in the 1980s, where like, people were being told like, you can't listen to this album, like these albums should be burned, like sometimes literally having book burnings. The whole history of comic books is full of a lot of cancel culture, and a lot of it from the very far right. Like there's a really great book called The 10-Cent Plague that kind of talks about the early days of comics being made as like floppies. They had book burnings, like literal book burnings, where they were burning the smut of comics, because the comics were kind of would get violent or talk about like horror or romance comics that got a little saucy. Like this is nothing new to art. But what's fascinating to me is seeing the very people, like a lot of the very people that were doing the canceling, now complaining about doing canceling. And once again, sometimes within a week of it, where it'll be like, this is horrendous, it should be canceled, and then being like, but they canceled my guy. Like, no, just, if you're gonna be against it, like, I'm a big fan of free speech. I'm also a big fan of like free markets. So like if a private business wants to cancel somebody for what they say, like, well, I may not personally agree with it, like that's that company's prerogative, and they at the end of the day have to think about their customers. That's just basically how it goes in a free market. Like, so you may not agree with them, like, firing somebody because of some reason, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know, that's kind of how it goes in a free market. And so, I don't know. Anyhow, rambling, a lot of thoughts, not trying to go on a political tirade. I am curious in the comments if you guys have noticed, like, sort of, I don't know, one question is just maybe pay attention in, like, today or the next few days to the people who are complaining about cancel culture. And I'm putting that in quotes again, because I'm not quite sure what that even means. But anyhow, people that are complaining about that, and see if they have the same complaints or convictions when it comes to people being canceled on the other side of the aisle. I personally find it interesting, and that to me is one of the things I try to avoid, although I'm human, so of course innately I'm going to have some hypocrisy in what I say, but at the end of the day, like, I do aim for consistency, and I feel like what's wrong for one should be wrong for another. Like, we shouldn't, like, be making too many variations and allowances for our standards, especially if we're considering them a moral standard. So if you're going to be for free speech, and you're going to be, like, advocating for artists having free reign to do what artists do, and a less censorious culture, then you have to be prepared for what that's going to mean for, like, stuff that's published and created that you may not personally agree with. And like at the end of the day, I'm not seeing that kind of consistency, in the people who tirade about cancel culture. What I am seeing is, like, a complaint about, hey, they canceled this book because of whatever. How horrible is that? And then a week later, like, Ta-Nehisi Coates should be nowhere near any of the properties I like. And I'm like, wait, well, you're doing the same thing that you're complaining about. So anyhow, just a thought. I will say, I like I said, I don't really read mainstream comics. I do like Ta-Nehisi Coates, like, as a writer, outside of comics, and I from what I gather and the little I have read, I feel like he's done really cool things for properties that were fairly dull, and he's kind of spiced them up and brought like a literary quality to it. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Have you noticed inconsistency when it comes to kind of people complaining about cancel culture? And let me know what you think. I'm gonna head to work, and I'm really optimistic that, because I had a day where I was able to get some art done and stuff like that. I'm optimistic I might be able to repeat that. So, all right. Till then, I'll see you guys tonight. Bye. All right, so there's a debate that goes on in art quite often, and usually it's very isolated to like art schools and places that are ingesting a bunch of like heavy art theory. But it's generally like this sort of notion that comes up, particularly in the realm of if you're studying to become like a commercial artist, and by commercial art, like a graphic designer, an illustrator, an artist who's doing the applied arts, but like with the focus on creating illustrations for commercial work, right? Or graphic design for commercial work. And it's basically like a debate that's existed for a long time of whether people should do commercial art, whether that is considered art, or whether you should just be doing art for art's sake. And my opinion switched on it, and I kind of wanted to go into that a little bit, just because it's an interesting discussion. And keep in mind, it's like, I'm not going to give like a fully nuanced conversation because this is just my thoughts. That's why this is called my Vloggins. But I do want to kind of get into it. So, first off, like, before I kind of get into the commercial art versus fine art thing, commercial versus, art for art's sake, and how my mind has switched on over it, and my perception of that conversation has changed quite a bit since having cut my teeth in the industry. I just want to kind of, explain to people who I am, just in case this is your first time to the channel. If it's not your first time to the channel, then I apologize for kind of going through this every time. But I'm Joshua Kemble. I'm a graphic designer and illustrator for over 15 years, and I'm now currently an art director. That's where I kind of am always driving when I'm doing these vlogs that I call Vloggins. And I also, on the side, like when I'm not working on art for the business that I do art direction for, and I'm not, hanging out with my son or doing freelance work for clients, I am always working on my own graphic novels or comic books, and usually they're very independent in the sense of like the style and the approach and the subject matter of those comics. So the comic that I'm currently working on is called Two Stories. Book 2 and Book 1 was just released this year through Marcosia, and you can get it on Amazon.com. It's a comic that talks really pretty honestly about my experience from years ago when I was experiencing a lot of suicidal ideation and actually, had like a brief suicide attempt. It also talks about navigating my wife's panic disorder, who was not my wife at the time. It was back when we were dating. It talks about childhood playground politics and how that interweaves with, or was interwoven with my own faith and my own loss of faith and my own personal story. Book 2 is actually going to get into how I found faith and basically also get into some pretty heavy subject matter as well. So it's a very personal story. It's black and white. It's hand lettered and hand inked very meticulously, and it took over 5 years to kind of create. But it's out, and the second book I'm hoping will take less time to create, but we'll see how that goes. So that was my long-winded intro. But if you haven't yet, and you're subscribed to my channel or whatever, make sure you pick up a copy of Two Stories. It's on sale right now on Amazon, and I'm not quite sure how the pricing works with that, but it seems like it dropped recently. And so I highly encourage people, if you want to save some money and it's a book you want to, you kind of intend to pick up, now would be a great time to go pick one up. If you know somebody in your life who would like the comic too, it'd be a good time to get it for them, because it's at like a discounted rate. So all that's out of the way. That's plugs. That's kind of explaining who I am. So now let's talk about commercial art versus fine art. Let me have some coffee real quick first. So when I was going to art school, there was this ongoing kind of debate that I feel kind of only exists in like maybe 1% of the art population. It's mainly confined to like some very high-end art galleries, and then mostly academia. It's an academic dispute that once you leave college isn't really a conversation you have frequently with people. But in college, at least when I was going, and maybe the opinion of fine art has kind of changed, and the opinion of high and low art has kind of skewed. But there used to be a really big divide between high and low art, and commercial and fine art, and they were almost viewed as like separate things, and they used to sort of paint a picture of graphic design and illustration being a lower form of art than fine art, which is whatever. I don't know how you define that, but they'd sort of create this distinction between the two and sort of make a value judgment on which is better. And this used to make me furious as a young artist. I mean, when I was younger, one of the things that annoyed me was like this assumption that if you do art and you're trying to make a living doing it, like you do it commercially, it's a lesser form of art. I was just of the opinion that actually it's a higher form of art, because high art itself, like high art, caters to the 1%, like the wealthiest people in the population, and it's made for like an exclusive group of people. The price point definitely prices anyone out of the market who would be, blue collar or lower class. And so it basically it's like a filtration system that literally sells the art to the most pretentious, wealthy people on the planet, and sort of is designed to sort of gatekeep your average person from it. And the thing I always liked about commercial art and really appealed, where that appealed to me a lot as a kid too, was the fact that, like, if you pick up a comic book, like, comic books are for all sorts of people, and the price point is low enough. You don't need like millions of dollars to kind of like buy a painting in a scenario like this. You can just go buy a cheap comic that's reproduced and generally is like affordable and accessible, and hopefully well written to the point where you don't need to have like a doctorate degree to understand the writing or understand the story. So I always felt like commercial art is the art of the masses, and then that fine art was like, actually, if we were debating like which was a higher or lower form of art, commercial art actually was only considered lower by the 1% of the population that wants to keep the valuation of their paintings high so that they can basically get a tax write-off. That's kind of how I used to view it, and I still kind of, to an extent, agree with the younger me on those points. I also used to get very frustrated because I'd feel like there were a lot of commercial artists who could probably cut their teeth very well doing the gallery scene, with illustration skills, especially cartoonists. And I still agree to this too. That there are a ton of cartoonists who can draw circles around a lot of like fine artists in the gallery world. And keep in mind, like, when I used to think this, and even today I still subscribe to some of that, and I still had like a real admiration for like the masters and the great artists throughout art history, especially the great painters, like Da Vinci's sketches, Van Gogh's like paintings, like, just, there's so many amazing artists like Cezanne, even the Dadaists like Duchamp, who installed a toilet into a gallery. I actually love Duchamp. I like a lot of high art, but when I was in art school, I always felt very combative and defensive of the medium that I loved, particularly comic books, because I felt like the division between high and low art was some arbitrary thing that was sort of being placed there by the wealthy to sort of oppress and kind of suppress the middle class. That being said, so I think that kind of paints my viewpoint. Oh, yeah. And then one of the other big arguments I would make, and I still would make to this day, is like the idea that fine art is somehow different than commercial art, as if fine art is not being sold, is sort of patently absurd. Like, most fine artists are aiming to sell their paintings, and they're selling them at galleries. And, if they're really hip to the fine art scene, right, they're doing, like, these big, things like Art Basel and stuff, where it's like these giant, pretty much conventions for selling paintings for tens of thousands of dollars. And the gallery owner, will rent a tent at these giant events and sort of exhibit artwork for sale. So it's like a high-class, high-end, rich person's comic convention, basically. And they're selling the paintings, and they're catering to a market. Like, a lot of painters will kind of find a niche. Like, I'm the guy who splatters rainbows, rainbow patterns on canvas, and that's kind of my thing. So that's the look I'm going to go to. Or I'm Rothko, and I'm just doing these giant paintings that are like a subtle gradient of one color. Or I'm a figurative painter, and I specialize in the female form or the male form. Or I'm a painter who captures slice of life moments, but of people in Paris with parasols walking throughout the park, and so that's kind of my niche. Whatever it is, usually they adhere to a specific style, a specific niche, and they have to cater to a market. I actually have a few friends who went into fine art and were very successful at it. One of the more successful friends of mine who went into it described the method of selling fine art, especially paintings, has a lot to do with just thinking about the interiors of people's homes and trying to pick color palettes when you're painting that would look good hanging in somebody's home, so that people will feel compelled to buy it because they'll be like, that would look great in my living room. Anyhow, and he's had pretty good success with fine art. You're also doing, so you're kind of at the beck and call of the client, who's usually part of the 1%, because in order to make it doing like fine art, you usually have to be selling your paintings for like $10,000 to $20,000 a piece. And the gallery owner, you're at the beck and call of all the gallery owners. So in LA, you know, there's specific districts and maybe 4 or 5 gallery owners that can kind of dictate whether what you do or not is going to sell. And a lot of the time will have you modify your work so that it's sellable, and encourage you in certain directions to grow as an artist. There's also like this huge amount of kayfabe in the gallery scene, right? Where it's like you kind of have to fake your identity and fake who you are, and basically in order to sell your work, you might have to start using vocabulary that you would normally use. And all of these descriptions are pretty much commercial art, because you're still doing money, like art for commerce, but you're just selling to a different clientele. Like you're selling to a much richer person, and you're probably selling less quantity, and that's generally the argument I used to make on the fine art versus commercial art. As I've gotten older, I have seen one area where I've changed my mind in that debate. And that is, having worked as a commercial artist for over 15 years, there is a part of me now that understands there's a difference between doing what sells and doing what's good. And I kind of feel like it's like the dilemma of a lot of great musicians throughout history. A lot of my favorite music is like indie music, and I always think of like the example of a band like the Pixies, where you have a band like the Pixies that's being very true to themselves. They're writing music that is their own style, it's their own voice, and it's not necessarily got like this giant market, and yet it has a mass influence on a lot of people. So, hang on 2 seconds. Just gotta pass this crazy slow car. So where I've changed my mind a bit is like having done art for a living for, you know, over 15 years. I will say there's this area of commercial art, like for me in my career, I got to a point where I was being hired for my style and my stuff, but at the same time the market was sort of dictating what I was doing to an extent, because I would know if something I was doing was gonna sell or not. And a lot of it would have to do with like the content itself. Like, was it accessible? Was it too heavy? A lot of the times if it was like too heavy of subject matter, like selling it would be very difficult. Whereas if it was lighthearted, it would sell very easily. And similarly, like, you know, when I do my like B-movie film poster style, that would sell very well. And that's a style I love, and it's authentic, but I doing this for, you know, 15 plus years, my passion and desire for creating that kind of work, the kind that's sold, started dissipating because I had this desire to tell stories that were true, and do slice of life, which is one of my favorite genres. But it's a much harder sell. And if I were letting my commercial side dictate the art I did, or inform the art I did, I never would have made 2 stories. Because 2 stories is a hard sell. It's like, it's a confessional story, it's very personal, it's very authentic. It requires a lot of time investment because I made choices like hand lettering each page to really try to give as personal and confessional an account as I could. And I know there are success stories in that, but just the success stories in that genre are few and far between. And that's also a genre that was like super popular, you know, 15 years ago, but the popularity of it's waned as well. And so, in order to do that, I had to set aside, because that was my artistic voice that I felt very convicted I needed to write this stuff. And the zombie posters that I was doing weren't cutting it for me. Like, they weren't giving me artistic fulfillment. There was this new thing that I needed to do, and I felt like the market and commerce was pushing me away from my calling as an artist. And so to me, like, the area I've changed my mind is I've started to see the value in making art for art's sake. Making art for the art as opposed to like for a market or anything like that. Like making something good just because it's good and it's worth pursuing truth and good. And that's kind of where I've become a little different in my approach to that subject. Not that there's higher or lower art. I just have grown. Like, I used to think the only art that had value was art that people monetarily value, that there was nothing wrong with finding a market and selling your work. And I still subscribe to that to an extent. Like, if I can sell 2 stories to people, that's great. But I've also come to the conviction, having published quite a few books that I've illustrated, and I didn't personally publish, just ones I did, or illustrations that I did get published in magazines, illustrations that I did getting published for t-shirts that were really trendy and very popular and very lucrative for me. Having had done that, I realize from that experience that not a lot of that stuff sticks around with me. Like, I'm still proud of the work I did, but I don't look back at that stuff and get a lot of existential value from it, aside from just monetary reward. And I have grown to the point as an artist where I've changed my mind a bit on the art for art's sake topic, because I think doing art for art's sake is sometimes a necessary element of being true to yourself as an artist. And that isn't to say that art you do for art's sake can't make money. It's just to say that there is value, I think, in pursuing creating good art and telling authentic and real stories, and pursuing whatever your inner calling is as an artist. And maybe your inner calling as an artist is saying, like, I need to do zombie posters. And in that case, that is a great inner calling. Like, I love zombie posters. I love B-movie posters. But if that calling changes, and that change doesn't necessarily align with a market that you can immediately envision, or you could see that it's going to be a harder sell, I still think it's worth pursuing, because I think some of the greatest art ever made, and I'm gonna use the Pixies, the band, as an example, but it's like a lot of the greatest music ever made, a lot of the greatest art ever made, did not have an immediate payback, but made something that was lasting because it touched on truth and beauty. And I know these are terms that, like, people debate with, because there's a lot of people who have a different kind of view on that. Like, epistemically, there's sort of like 3 sort of epistemic viewpoints that somebody can approach things from, of a realist, a relativist, or a nihilist. And to the relativist or the nihilist, to talk of things like beauty and truth is a tough sell, right? And keep in mind, most people alternate between those 3 depending on the issue, because there are some things that just logically it makes more sense to approach from a relativist viewpoint. But I think at their core, people tend to align with one of those 3 core beliefs. And what so my point is, if you align with like two of those three, and you're not like really aligning with like a realist in your viewpoint, then maybe discussions of truth and beauty can be really difficult to kind of digest. But for me, I think if we're having a true good faith conversation, I think most artists would acknowledge there's like this inner part of ourselves that like aches to create something. Whether it's aching to, like in my case, even my little side project, like I have this ache and desire to create music. And that desire does not necessarily have to do with like a monetary need. It's like a spiritual need. Like I need art. I need to make that art, and whether people like it or not. And similarly, like I think with storytelling, I think you're sometimes going to really have just the muse or whatever you want to call it kind of guide you to invest in something like making a comic book, right? And I guess my point is, I think there is more, like the younger me would have thought that value is dictated by commercial value in a market, and the older me is starting to see that's not always the case. Like I have seen enough terrible artwork that has high sales numbers, and you know, good for that artist. Like this hustle is hard, and if you can make it work, great. But I have also seen enough brilliant artists who haven't made a penny off of their work, and I don't want to like encourage like some myth of like the starving artist or anything, but I also think like if you opt in your life to be an artist, there's a part of that is allowing the possibility, wow, there's a very giantly slow city bus in front of me. Okay, they just moved. I'm thankful. Yeah, so anyhow, like there's just this huge part of me now as an adult that thinks that there is value in pursuing things that aren't necessarily connected to commerce, because there is value outside of commerce. Like I think that beauty and truth and authenticity have value that can't be dictated by a market, like that kind of fall outside. It's an outlier that isn't being considered by somebody who's only considering markets in their output and outlook. I do think if you're making art, whether it's for art's sake or not, you should market the hell out of it and try to make a living off of it and try to sell it and try to get the word out about the projects that you believe in, even if they aren't commercially viable. Because strange things happen, and sometimes those things do have a place in the market. But my point, I guess, is just that, like, I hope that as artists we're also pursuing our true authentic selves and what we're creating. And that doesn't mean everybody is going to be called or interested in doing like some, you know, slice of life, you know, comic about mental illness or something. Like that's my own thing, right? That's my calling. But even if your calling is like to do, you know, a sci-fi, a horror, whatever it is, there's gonna be temptations along the road to change your art or to gear your art towards what specifically sells and what's in the market. And I just want to say, like, there's a difference between being a long-lasting brand that's thinking about value and quality, right? And a short-term brand that's basically thinking about the current trend and the current niche and the current art challenge or whatever it is. And I do feel like the younger me would be like having this hotly contested debate about this. But that's just a thought that has been running through my mind because it's just such an ongoing debate in art school. I will say, given some distance, I have rarely, if ever, had the debate as to whether I'm an artist or not, because I do illustration and graphic design outside of art school. The second I was gone from art school, like, that conversation disappeared. I don't meet a lot of people who, like, second guess whether illustrators, cartoonists, or graphic designers are artists. Whereas, like, in art school, I used to meet people like that all the time. And I think that also might just tie into academia, where there's sometimes, like, a level of pretension and obnoxiousness. And I think part of that might just be young kids learning heavy theory that they don't know how to digest or handle, and so they're going to misappropriate and use. And also younger adults who, like, have more trouble with ambiguity and gray areas and want to adhere to, like, black and white thinking. And I think when you think in black and white terms, it's like it's either art or it's not art. It's either commercial or it's not commercial. But you can kind of lose these weird gray areas. But I will say, like I said, I've changed my mind on art for art's sake. And now I'm going to go to work. I'm almost there. But I do want to probably close this out and get it up on YouTube. Thanks to everybody who's watched it so far, and I want to know what you guys think. What do you think? Do you think there's a difference between commercial and fine art? Do you think there is such a thing as high and low art? And like, is that a distinction worth making? And also, what are your thoughts on art for art's sake versus art for commerce? And can there be overlap? Like, anyhow, just let me know what you think in the comments. I've been enjoying the comments I get on these YouTube videos as I've started these vloggins. And I will see you guys on the next vloggins. If you haven't, hit subscribe, hit that bell so you can be notified, especially when I start doing live streams again. And that'll give you a notification when a live stream's about to go up, so you can hop in on the chats. Sometimes I might even have you on the videos. And then, other than that, just, you know, please don't hesitate to support the art for art's sake that I did, which is 2 stories, book 1. And I will see you guys on the next vloggins. I'm going to go art direct some commercial art, and I'll see you guys either when I get home or on the next vloggins. Bye.